Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition here to give you a quick recap of what went down last night at the first committee of the whole presentation under interim superintendent Rochelle Cox. It's a mouthful, y'all. It's a real mouthful. Um, and yeah, Heather, how are you doing this morning?
Good, except for did we just do this last week?
Yeah, this was a quick turnaround. But yeah, it was a good conversation and presentation last night. It was great to hear from the principals. Let me not get too far down the road of the rundown. Why don't you give us the rundown from last night's meeting?
Yeah, so really last night the format we saw sort of a revised format of presentations again. We saw kind of academics first of all kind of gave us the structure of how their teams are going to run this year. Then they talked about their priorities, their very specific priorities, and then they kind of shared what professional development or PD that their department is doing in order to make sure that the staff comes back. And I would say there was a general theme of departments letting us know what they were doing in professional development to get ready for this new school year, right? We also heard then from the school improvement structures, and we heard a little bit about what they are going to do. They talked a little bit about this thing called PLC, which were professional learning
Communities,
communities, right? And the way that they're hoping to work together with the ILT teams
the
and
instructional
the
leadership teams.
thank you and the
Plan.
school improvement plans, the
Yep.
SIPs. So anyway, so we learned a lot about what they are going to be doing, how their structures are going to be happening, what their priorities are, and then what their staff is working on in professional development. Then we learned a little bit about climate and culture. We heard a kind of the similar theme, what their structure is, what their priorities are, what their staff is doing for professional development. And then what was really fun for me was that we got to see and hear from multiple principals across a lot of different experiences, like a high school principal, a middle school principal, an elementary school principal, a Montessori principal, about what that professional development and training looks like and matriculates down to into their specific school. Then there were question and answers, and then we were done. So that was the recap. I tried to go fast.
Yeah. So yeah, I think for me, this the slide of the night wasn't actually an MPS. Well, I guess it was an MPS slide. They're all MPS slides. But it was during the principal conversation around like what does this all actually look like in practice? And so Principal Arnold from Green Central shared what are the relationships between all those acronyms that Heather was rushing through earlier. So the SIP, which is the school improvement plan, which every school will have, not just schools who are on a list for targeted support, but every school has a SIP. So the SIP guides all of the work, and it focuses on student outcomes and staff actions. Then you have the instructional leadership team and the instructional coaches team who helps figure out like, okay, where how are we doing in our progress through, to our school improvement plan goals? What type of support do we need to continue to provide? And then that then guides the grade level professional learning communities. And so, having teams of at each within each grade level really talk about what types of supports are necessary, how can we provide more push and support for specific students potentially or student groups, where are we seeing a struggle across all like across the whole grade and maybe a specific skill set or whatever. And I just thought this helped break down what was and really felt like a lot of acronyms and jargon that was kind of being thrown together. This helped. I thought Principal Arnold really broke this down well to help me understand and better get an idea around how all these things work together. And I know we they also mentioned during the meeting last night that members of the instructional team leadership teams will be participating on the professional learning communities now too. And so I've talked a lot about the importance of having a principal be the instructional leader of a building. And I think this really positions this well. And I hope that's going to be what we see as like a system wide requirement as like we need to see principals be the instructional leader in the building and get the support from their associate superintendents for that. And again, I think this at least creates the infrastructure and the support to do so.
Yeah, so putting on my like former teacher hat, right? We do talk a lot about differentiated instruction. So you have your curriculum that comes in, we have a brand new math curriculum, you have the manipulatives that come with it, and then you have your students coming from all kinds of experiences. And now post pandemic, there's like lots of kiddos coming into first grade who haven't had a kindergarten experience or a high five experience. And um, an example of that would be that I've been in classrooms, right, where I see 6 year olds who haven't been using scissors before. Well, that's a pre-handwriting skill that you're working on. So when I hear things like differentiated instruction and the ability for a team of teachers to come together to share like the data, here's where this group of humans is at now, and then another group to help you expand your capacity as a teacher, because just writing the basic lesson plans and reading through what the curricula itself is telling you is a whole lot of work that most teachers do at night or on the weekend. Let's just be real. Then you try to add talking about how you're thinking about this kiddo who's over here and this kiddo who's over here and all these kiddos that are everywhere, and how are you going to meet all of their needs. When I think of showing up with data ready and then the team planning together, I get excited about not only the frustration that it could relieve and the capacity it could create for expansiveness for teachers. I
Yeah.
also think about the little kiddos who get to be there and have their needs met. And so I know that I had to do a lot of that work on my own as a teacher, and I couldn't do it well then, or else I didn't have a personal life, right? And so I'm excited about that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that it was a really good opportunity to hear, how things at the district level are being translated. And I thought Interim Superintendent Cox shared a really important reflection as she was also listening to the presentation, which is like an interdependence between schools and central office. And
Mm,
I think we are forgetting, or we in the past we have forgotten that there is that interdependent relationship from both sides, right? Like I know there's a lot of frustration and concern that district office was too top down, and I think there was
mm,
also a lot of frustration and concern that like schools were not doing what they needed to do and not being held accountable to that and figuring out the type of supports necessary in order to adequately support the school communities. And so um, yeah, I'm hoping that one, this new structure within the board meetings helps tighten that relationship, and then also, the board gets to see, and then the public as a result gets to see how that relate like where that relationship actually lives and exists, and it's not just board, people at Davis Center talking about things that may or may not actually be happening in schools. Like we're getting real life examples of that, which I think is a good thing, especially when you're trying to figure out like where are the breakdowns happening. So with that, I think we should start to wrap up. Do you want to highlight your do better moment, and then we'll end on our most valuable moments from last night?
yeah, so my do better moment is really that I would like to encourage this team to think about um, how to present information in a way that doesn't assume that I know the acronyms, right? And so I know that it's hard because they live in it. And we've experienced this too, where sometimes we think about something for so long and then we, put it out there and then we realize like, wait a minute, everybody isn't at this same place. So I recognize that, but my encouragement would be, let's think about what is a parent hearing and how can we make this conversation, like as a parent, I want to be able to hear and maybe I see an acronym once or twice, but then like I want to be able to get a visual for what that group or what that word means, and without having to have spent 6 years in the boardroom to understand it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it was, I think someone mentioned like, MPS, we love our acronyms, and like said MPS, love as an acronym. I don't know. That was maybe a nerdy joke. Never mind. I'll just move on. I've embarrassed myself enough.
We are school board nerds. It's
um,
okay.
so my do better moment was, um, I thought specifically directors Jourdain and Inns in their like appreciation for having the principals present and like telling interim superintendent Cox how valuable that was, in some ways also took a swipe at the district staff, the central office staff
Mhm.
that have been presenting to them and trying to share information with them for years. I know, one of the school board member, one of the two of them said like that they're tired of hearing from talking heads, they're, all these kinds of things, which is like, I think really, I think we can say like we like this change without also like denigrating the district staff that also were working really hard to provide these updates in the past, and are still the ones that are helping identify the principles now to, put in front of you so that you can learn even more. And so yeah, I don't know, that felt like a little mean and very unnecessary. Um, and I think more than anything, it was just like being careless with your words, but words matter. And we spent so much time yesterday during the meeting talking about climate and culture, and like that's an example of it, right? Is like
That's
you,
right.
you can be an educator could be careless with their words, and the type of impact that that has with everybody listening, not just the person that's receiving it, but like maybe is it okay for me to call the district staff talking heads? I don't think so. I never would. Um, and because they are more than a talking head too, they serve a really important functional purpose for the district, um, that is already under attack. That's the other thing, is like the central office is already under attack regularly for the role they do play in supporting students across the district, which is a very important role but is consistently undermined. And so anyway, I one just want to share appreciation for the district staff for one decentering themselves and allowing principals to have more space during board meetings, but two, for like the role that they play in setting up the systems to support principals and educators and students every single day, even if, at times they come up short, at times things break down. um yeah, I just want to say like, yeah, I thought that was out of bounds and not necessary. So that's my do better moment.
Okay, I'm gonna do my most valuable moment,
Go for it.
which is uh, Principal Tara Fitzgerald. Um, she shared a lot about how they set up climate and culture at Anderson Middle School, and she used a phrase which I think she could have instead used a lot of jargon, but what she used was safety squads. She used the phrase safety squads, and for me that created a sense, and then she explained what that all includes, but kind of back to my point of like a little jargony speak, that phrase safety squad, I was like, oh, I get what that is. As a parent, I have an idea of what the plan is to work on safety at Anderson because of that. And so I just want to say that I really appreciated specifically that visual and that language, and so like that's my like most valuable and a nudge.
Yeah. I'd say my most valuable moment from last night was hearing from Principal Ahmed Amin, from
Mm-hmm.
Stanford. He I thought he was the one that was real with like where they're at a school. And while I think this is a really good opportunity from us to hear from principals, I do think there's also a risk around like, so many negative things are already said about Minneapolis public schools out there in the public. And so we want to bring in our principals to highlight the positive things that are happening in our school. um, but the board also needs to understand like the full reality and the full picture of what's going on in our schools, and especially as we think about the upcoming school board election and thinking about good governance, right? Like they need to know like what is going on. And I thought Principal Ahmed Amin shared, you know some not great data about like some of the culture things that are going on, and like how student voice from the student survey, right? And like students identifying, hey, this isn't working really well. um, you know, identifying that they got a score out of 1 to 100, a 1 on something from their students, which was, not great. And so I want to share my most valuable moment is like Principal Ahmed Amin being vulnerable and willing to be open and take that criticism in front of the school board, and in front of the Minneapolis community to share something that's not going right. But the role of good governance is to have a clear understanding of what's not going right and then try to create the conditions to support that improvement, right? And so if the board in the future isn't getting that full picture of if people don't feel comfortable being vulnerable in front of the school board and as a result the full city, then like they can't do their jobs either. And so I just really want to shout out Principal Ahmed Amin for being vulnerable in the first, this isn't the first time. There have been other principals, but like in this new structure under the new superintendent, interim superintendent, being like, yeah, this is what's going on. I'm a former student of Sanford, and here's where we're at with what's going on. And I just really appreciated that because I think we can't forget that we have to have real conversations around what has to improve. And MPS sometimes gets into this place where they have to talk about the positive things because no one else will talk about the positive things around what's going on in Minneapolis public schools. And at the same time, like we talk about the plan, but we also never talk about like, okay, what happens when the plan doesn't
That's
go
right.
according to plan, right? And so I just think again we have to, yeah, oh, share like, yeah, this is what's going on, and we have work to do to fix it. So anyway, that's my most valuable moment.
Yep. All right. Well, I think we're off to it's all so exciting. Everybody's full of optimism in September, right? And so we'll continue to watch these board meetings. We'll continue to debrief. We're going to continue to pay attention, and you got to pay attention as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening. And the school year is just around the corner. So if good luck, and have an amazing start of your school year.
Bye.
Bye.